Good evening. I'm Selwyn Collins, your host of CWS Conversations with Selwyn. Thank you for joining us. And those of you who are joining us for the first time, thank you very much. For those of you who are tuning in from the Caribbean and Guyana, or if you have slow internet connection, roll your mouse over the video screen and select a number that's good for you. There is high definition, which is 480, standard definition, which is, I think, 400, and then there is, I guess, regular at 360. I would like everybody to be able to participate and enjoy the show. Again, thank you. CWS is about having conversations with people about their journey and how they're using their gifts and talents to help others. I'm always looking for someone, especially ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Someone who has a story to tell. And that's not difficult, really, in a sense, because we all have some story to tell. But what I especially look for is not just successes, but challenges. Because to me, how someone overcomes their challenge or their challenges tells us a lot about who they are as a person. And when I say this, I think about courage. And what comes to mind when I think about courage right now, and I think is because we are all in mourning, the whole world is in mourning, Nelson Mandela as a man of courage, great courage. And I think it was Winston Churchill who said that courage is what it takes to get up and speak and what it takes to sit down and listen. And I like that. And it was it Mark Twain? That was the guy who said, courage is having mastery over fear, is resisting fear but not the absence of fear. And Ernest Hemingway, I believe, was the guy who talked about having grace under pressure. And then there's Muhammad Ali who said, without the courage, or if you don't find the courage or take the courage to do something, then you'll not make any contribution to life. I can't remember the exact thing about it, but that to me says a lot. And when I think about Nelson Mandela especially, and his bout with courage, I think about respect as well, because I believe that for him to stand up in front of a whole country so diverse, so many wounds, so many pain, so many suffering, where the atmosphere was laden with revenge and vengeance and anger and animosity. I want to do to my neighbor or to my enemy what they did to me. And to stand up and say, no, let's reconcile. Let us speak to our enemies. Let us invite our enemies to our table and sit down. That took courage, but it also took respect, because I believe in leadership. If the country, if the people did not respect Nelson Mandela, this would not have been possible. So to me, it's the juxtaposition of courage and respect that creates great leadership. And I speak a lot about courage here tonight because our guest tonight, a young woman who in recent days I've come to respect. I've just met her. Someone introduced me to her writing, and I was really moved on a number of different levels. And I like the idea of when you want something to happen and you believe in it happening, how everything seems to conspire to make it happen. We didn't have an opening, and an opening showed up. And I contacted Sara. Her, by the way, the guest tonight is Sara Bharrat. And I contacted her, and right away she said it's okay. So everything came together to make this possible. I don't want to spend too long on my monologue, but there are so many wonderful things that happened recently that I want to draw to your attention. One of the things is the concept of neighbor. And tonight, Sara and I are going to talk a little bit about that. How neighbors, how important it is to have neighbors and to have good relationships with people, regardless of their background, their ethnicity, and so on. So without much further ado, I'll take a break, and when I return, I'll introduce you to this wonderful, brilliant, courageous young lady. We are back. Those of you who are joining us for the first time, I'm Selwyn Collins, your host of CWS Conversations with Selwyn. The lovely lady next to me is Sara Bharrat. Sara, good evening.
Good evening, Selwyn, and good evening to everyone listening tonight.
Thank you for joining us, Sara. Thank you.
My pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here with you all.
I have in front of me a few lines that I will use to just give a brief introduction into who you are. It says, Sara Bharrat grew up in Craig Village, a small farming community about 9 miles outside Georgetown. She was born in April '89 and comes from a traditional Hindu family. However, she's always taken an interest in other faiths and sometimes half-jestingly dubs herself a Hikalim. I hope you will educate me during the show about what a Hikalim is. Anyway,
of course I will.
Just out of high school, she abandoned dreams of becoming a GDF pilot and began her career in journalism at the Stabroek News. By 2011, she decided to resign from her job and start the University of Guyana as a full-time student. Currently, Sara is a third-year linguistic major and freelance writer journalist. Sara, after reading several of your blogs, I have to admit that I do not believe asking you to tell us who you are is fair to either you or our audience. You can, of course, but my hope is that by the end of this conversation, each of us will have a multifaceted perspective of who you are. Our own interpretation, I believe, is more appropriate. And so I believe also it would be disrespectful to the memory of Nelson Mandela if, as the world mourns his passing, I do not start this conversation with a question about him. So in honor of, of perhaps the greatest statesman in the world has ever seen, I ask, how did the news of his death affect you?
Well, when I heard of Mandela's passing, my immediate reaction was a sense of loss. I wondered, where would I find somebody to inspire me like Mandela had inspired me? And in fact, to use the past tense is an insult to the gentleman. Mandela still inspires me. And since then, I've been telling everybody this. I've been saying that let's not insult the memory of Mandela by mourning for him, because Mandela is not gone. For me, Mandela is very much alive, and for those of us who embrace fear so that fear may fuel our courage, Mandela is always going to be alive. Mandela is going to live on in the hearts of those of us who fight. So if we want to keep him alive, we've got to stand up, speak out, embrace fear, and do what we have to do to bring change.
Well said. I asked this next question of my previous guest. As a young woman, born just, well, this is not what I asked of her, but I'm framing it this way to suit you. Born just 1 year before his release. I do not know if this is a fair question, but based on how you just answered, spoke out about your feelings about Mandela, I think it is. but because of who he was and had done, I will ask if you could ask him one question, what would that be?
If I could ask him one question, that question would be, Selwyn, I would say, Mr. Mandela, how did you keep believing when there seemed to be nothing to believe in? I would ask him, how did he keep believing? How did he find the strength to go on? That is what I would ask him. I'm very interested in the answer to that. I am.
Sarah, I believe in serendipity. I believe in serendipity. I believe in following the flow. I am an advocate for the flow. And you said you would have asked him, where did he find the courage to go
Yeah.
on? Where do you find the courage?
It's interesting you would ask me that question because it seems as though everybody has been interested in the answer to that question. And honestly, there is no answer to that question. If there were a source within me or within any of us that I knew how to identify, and I would say, hey, this is where you get it from. But I think where the courage actually comes from, and I said that to begin with, the courage comes from my fear. Uh, how it started for me, Selwyn, when I wrote that first article on the blog that dealt with racial politics, I was afraid to write it. Every word I typed, I felt fear. And I realized that the things we are most afraid to say, those are the things that are most important for us to say.
I like that.
So I guess you can say that the courage comes from the need to say the things that should be said, not just for me, but for us, for all of us.
I'm I am so encouraged by what I'm hearing so far, Sarah. I am confident that by the end of this conversation, you would have in some way transformed some of us, or most of us, perhaps all of us. When you hear
I
the
hope
word
so.
Guyana, what comes to mind?
I'm sorry, when I hear about Guyana, what
When you
comes to
hear the
mind? That
word
is
when you
question.
hear the word Guyana, what comes to mind? What do you think of?
Home.
Hmm.
I know it's not the most original answer, but anywhere we go, home is important. And home is so important that it never leaves us. I've listened to people who've migrated. They always yearn for home. The heart is left there. And when I hear Guyana, Guyana may not be the best place on earth, but Guyana is my best place on earth.
Back to Nelson Mandela. He had a desire to fight the system that imprisoned him physically, but imprisoned so many people. So many people psychologically and so on. Um, and many were imprisoned because of their difference, specifically race.
Yes.
Is this Sara Bharrat's fight or one of her fights?
I would say that has become my main fight currently.
I
It
see.
has become my main fight because when you live here, Selwyn, and you walk around every day and you look at your countrymen and women, they're locked up in a prison of their own making. You begin to ask yourself, how can I free them? I believe it's V.S. Naipaul spoke about our state of unconsciousness.
Hmm.
And for me, it's how do I wake them up? How do I wake them up? Because I refuse to sit by and watch them sleep their entire lives away.
I believe that sometimes the deepest slumber requires the loudest sound, and you are making a loud sound. Is evoking change through awareness your primary reason for writing?
Yes, I would say awareness, but more so, it's subtly breaking the silence
Mm-hmm.
because Guyanese everywhere, regardless of where they live, here or abroad, they are aware of the problems, they are aware of the issues, but we Guyanese tend not to talk about anything. So we sit down in our little bubbles and we ignore everything. And then we see each other and we pretend that everything is fine and nobody says anything. So I believe it's about time that we confronted each other and we said, listen, we're a family, this is the problem, and this is how we can deal with it. So by speaking, we find solutions.
What kind of shifts or shift in attitudes, perceptions, and policies must occur to effect this change you seek?
Well, Selwyn, before we even begin to talk shift in policy, the major shift comes with attitude. I believe too that what it is I'm trying to do is to cause a psychological shift,
Mm-hmm.
which is the worst kind to even attempt to make happen. How do I get somebody to think? And that's what we're doing here. We're trying to get Guyanese to think. How do I get you to think? So before we can begin to shift policies, we have to get people thinking about policy shifting. If
Mm-hmm.
nobody is thinking about policy shifting, it's never going to happen. So the first step in this process, Alvin, is first to begin thinking about it.
Okay.
When we think about it, we're eventually going to hunger for solutions. And when we hunger for solutions, our brains are going to kick in and we're going to come up with some brilliant plans. I'm very sure about that.
You have the ears and eyes of a global audience, not only the diaspora. Um,
Yes.
is there anything in particular you would like to draw their attention to?
I can think of a list of 10,000 things, but the one on my mind tonight
Yes.
is honesty. Honesty.
Honesty.
In our world today, we are not honest with each other. You know, it's something as simple as you see your friend, hey, how are you today? You look fabulous. And in your mind, you're saying, my God, you're a mess. And why don't you tell your friend that in a nice way? Listen, you're not so well today. You know, you may be under the weather, but I think you can improve yourself in this way. And something, basic honesty like that is very, very important for where we're going as a globe. And if we can't be honest with people, then we definitely aren't being honest with ourselves because, you know, that indicates that lying is a habit for us. And if we're going to be practicing lying externally, we obviously practice lying internally, which means we're a bunch of people sitting on a globe lying to ourselves daily. And I'm not sure where we expect to get with all the lying. You know, honesty, Selwyn. Honesty is it.
Okay. Can you give us a glimpse into 3 stages of Sarah Barrett's life? At 9 years old, at 16 years old, and then at age 21.
All right. At 9 years old, I was living in Craig Village still, but I was living along Craig Sideline Dam, where my family has a farm, and my mother, myself, and my younger brother had moved there for a few years after she had been divorced. At 9 years old, I think perhaps that was one of the hardest patches in my life because that is when I really began to wake up. You know, before when I was in a nuclear family, I had both parents there. It was a comfortable life, but suddenly I was a part of a single parent family and I began to see the world differently. And that had quite an impact on how I see the world now. At 16, I was at St. Stanislaus College. I was probably in lower sixth, and that's when I was entertaining dreams of joining the Guyana Defense Force. I had just gotten it into my head that I wanted to be a pilot, and in those days, I believe I was so idealistic. I was even more idealistic than I am now. I thought that by joining the army, it would be an expression of my patriotism. Patriotism. We should talk about patriotism later on. And at 21, I wasn't so sure about patriotism anymore because I was looking around me at this time. You know, I had started my career at Sabbath News. I had been with them for just over 2 years then. And I had gotten an inside look at the political system in my country. And I was really searching for something to believe in at that point because every day you walk into the newsroom and you're blasted with the negative things. You know, it's all about negativity. You have to see the bad first. And I saw so much bad during my time there. I think for a while I forgot how to see good. And I think that's something a lot of us still do. We forget how to see the good.
What is your fondest memory of growing up as a child in Guyana?
My fondest memory, that would be of my nanny, my maternal grandmother.
Hmm.
Uh, she used to do this thing for as long as I can remember. Well, I'm a Hindu, so she would teach me to sing Sanskrit prayers. And in the evenings, most of the times we had blackouts, cultural thing here in Guyana. But during blackouts, she would sit with me or lie next to me and she would sing to me. And she would sing to me in Sanskrit. And now, when I remember my childhood, I often think of that because it brings me peace. It calms me. That right there is the fondest childhood memory.
And how did your parents influence you?
My parents. Well, my mother, my mother was a prime example of what a strong woman is. Without my mother, I don't think my personality would have been this forceful at so young an age. But the thing we need to realize is that parents, well, depending on how you look at it, parents don't always influence you in a positive way. Because my father, for example, for a while, I didn't know how to keep promises because I thought not keeping promises was a trendy thing. And I had gotten the habit from my father. So, sometimes we inherit habits and it's very hard to break them. So, yes.
So, why did you give up your dreams to become a pilot in the Guyana Defense Force?
That actually was less of my doing and more of faith's doing because I had applied to do the cadet officer course.
Hmm.
I had gone as far as the final interview, and my Nana, my paternal grandfather, he passed away that January, just before the course was supposed to start. And after he passed on, I just didn't want to leave home and family anymore. I thought that home was the most important place to be at that time.
Is it accurate to say that you have a love affair with writing?
Is it accurate to say?
That you have a love affair with writing?
Oh, it's more than a love affair. I've been writing for so long. Writing is what I do when I'm sad or I'm happy or I'm angry or anything. I write and have conversations with myself, Selwyn. It's beyond a love affair. I think writing is an extension of me. I think perhaps if we could take writing and turn writing, as I think something most of us look for, not necessarily a lover, but we look for this one friend who shares our ideals and who understands us. That lifelong friend, you want somebody to witness your life. If we could take writing and make writing a person, writing would be that friend for me.
Oh, that was so eloquently put. I like that. I must remember that, Sarah. Um, and so journalism, you would say, was a natural trajectory or a natural path for you.
Journalism was a natural path for me. When I applied for the job at Starbuck News, well, all my life, and this is ironic actually, because my family, they're traditionally PPP voters,
Hmm.
and it's usual for them to buy a certain newspaper. But my family, they've always read the Starbuck News, which in itself is irony that they would read the Starbuck News. So I grew up on the Starbuck News. And one day I was batting through the pages. I saw a vacancy and I said, I should apply for this because, my writing, I was more interested in writing fiction, poetry. I had
Uh,
never thought about journalism until I saw that vacancy and I applied for it. And within a week on the job, I had, fallen in love.
do you remember your
I could
first
not
story?
get it out.
Do you remember your
I
first story?
remember
Your first story.
my first story. I don't remember my first story, and the reason for that is because what they do when you start the job is they send you to court. So the first place any new reporter goes to is to the Georgetown Magistrates Court, where you sit and listen to cases. So nothing extraordinary hit me, but a couple of weeks after I got on the job, stories like the Lusignan and Barksdale massacres, there was a murder of a businessman, Calamity, and lots of horrible things were happening on the crime front during that year. So my first year on the job was a very bloody year.
Mm, bloody. Wow.
Yes.
On your blog, there are some thought-provoking and attention-grabbing titles like, "If you call my brother a slave, I shall answer you." "Being East Indian does not automatically make me PPP. They brand us, play us, and cast us aside. The ashes
Yes.
of Chetty and Bornham." Was that your intention?
I didn't get the question.
What was that your intention to provoke thoughts, to grab attention?
Yes, yes,
Mm-hmm.
that was the intention.
But
The
you did.
intention was to provoke thinking,
Yes.
make people think, and I believe that by being as honest as I could be, and by talking about things that are technically taboo, I would get them to think.
Sarah,
Seems to be working, don't you think, Selwyn?
yes, I must say that. And this is one of the reasons why you're on here tonight.
Yes,
I'm just curious about your world. Um,
it is.
and you're so young and so forward thinking, so positive, so courageous. You write so well, so eloquently. Where did this what do you think are the factors that have put all of this together to create at least this particular facet of Sara Bharrat? What are some of the things that have, you know, that have come together, conspired, so to speak, to give us this aspect of Sara Bharrat?
Well, that there's not a long list, but if I had to narrow it down to three things,
Mm-hmm.
I would say that it started with me examining myself and acknowledging my own part in contributing to the problem in my society. And after I had examined that, I had to deal with my own guilt.
Mm.
So after I dealt with my guilt, I then went around literally looking for role models. I was searching and searching for role models. And my mother said to me one morning that when you're looking for things that just aren't there, you're going to waste your entire life just searching. What you need to realize is that one day you're going to get older, and the things you're looking for are the things you can become. So, in a roundabout way, I'm trying to become the thing that my generation seems to spend so much time looking for here in Guyana, role models. But factors factors that have contributed to me being who I am. It starts with my beliefs, my faith, my religion. It's something that I'm not very serious about publicly. My religion. I don't think I've ever publicly stated I am a Hindu. I don't think I ever have. And the reason for that is because I don't want to alienate anybody else of another faith. Because right there again, that's another social barrier between us. I think now would be a nice time to explain Hikulim to you.
Mm-hmm.
When I go about telling people I am a Hikulim, that's actually a combination of Hinduism, Catholicism, and Islam. So in essence, I've selected a denomination of Christianity, and I'm saying that, listen, I am a combination of the three major religions here in Guyana. And of course, you can't believe in everything. However, what you can do is you can study everybody's beliefs, and you can learn to respect them. And I believe that learning to respect people is very important. And in learning to respect my brothers and sisters, and in learning to see people, not just look at them, Selwyn, and see what's on the surface, but to look at them and see the man or see the woman and see what's inside of them, to see what they believe, what gets them ticking, you know, what shapes their view of the world. That is that has been my focus for a while in getting to know the people that I share a home with. Because Guyana is a home and we're all under one roof. So I'm getting to know my siblings.
Sarah, this is an appropriate time to go to the chat room and read some comments. And I'll read Lester Jordan's first. And he said, wise beyond her years. Karen G said, good communication and sharing from your mom. So this is now your becoming. Don't stop. And before that, I apologize, Carol. I just had to read Lester's comment that she is wise beyond her years. Carol asked, do you live in fear or fear of rejection?
Do I live in fear or?
Fear of rejection. Do you live in fear of rejection?
No, I don't. I don't. Because when I wrote the first blog, picture this. I'm standing on a cliff, or the Pacoima man. I'm on a mountain, one of the mountains, and I'm standing there. And the question is, to jump or not to jump? And I figured, let me jump. So, and after you've jumped, I wish I could explain the feeling to you. I think it's the closest I've ever come to feeling free. Fear is a very complex thing, Fear feeds your courage, and fear, when you embrace it, gives you an exhilarating feeling of being free. That's the best I can answer that question.
I think I get it. I think I get it. You spoke about your generation. Would you say your generation has a voice? And if so, what is its message?
I think that my generation is now beginning to shape that voice. The voice is there. From time to time it mumbles. Behind closed doors, it's loud. Out of doors, mumbling. But I believe that when the voice is heard, the message is going to be this. And the message is going to be to the generation before us. And I believe we're going to stand up one day and we're going to say to them that, listen, we wish that a couple decades ago, while you were doing the things you were doing, and this goes to everybody, all of them from the last generation, we wish that when you were doing all of those things, you would have thought of us for just 30 seconds. That you would have thought of us and wondered, what would my actions mean for them? Perhaps when they were acting, no, not perhaps, but when they were acting, I was nowhere near to being on earth. But I wish that they had still thought of me for 30 seconds, and thought of us. And I think that is going to be one of the first things we're going to tell them.
I would venture to say, at some risk, that is a very profound message, and I suggest that message also be shouted and to current and future generations, because I think it's the curse of all generations that very rarely any particular generation is present to what the effects of our action is on future generation. So I love the message, Sarah. I love it, and I am, your previous generation, and I absorb that, and I take responsibility, and I hope our listeners are listening to this and absorbing it as well. Again, you are wise beyond your years. Utopia. For those not familiar with your blog, can you describe Utopia and how the name came about?
All right. Well, first of all, we can't talk of Utopia without acknowledging the creator. Local writer Ruel Johnson would have come up with the term Utopia. Ruel originally, and if I'm correct, Ruel originally used the term to describe those politicians who were at Freedom House. And when I used the term on my blog, I think what happened is the intended connotations that Johnson's intended connotations may not have necessarily been my connotations. When I used Keynes Utopia, for me, Keynes Utopia reflected the fact that our country, our entire economy, the history of Guyana is built block by block upon the sugar cane. And like I was saying earlier, we're all sitting around here ignoring problems, pretending that we live in a perfect world. So when I think Keynes Utopia, it reeks of irony to me. And if you notice, in my last two posts, I believe I would not have used the term. And the reason I desisted from using the term is because my Indian brothers and sisters were offended by it. They said that you might as well call Guyana uh, Cleatopia. That was one of the suggestions. And I said, listen, the intention here is not to attack anybody because of their ethnicity. In fact, it would be ridiculous for you to tell me that I am attacking you. You can't tell me that I'm being racist. I'm an Indian as well. Why? What's your ground, for that accusation? I said to them that Keynes Utopia is a sort of truth that you're not willing to see. The fact of the matter is that here in Guyana, we've got a pocket of descendants from the cane cutter who are there and they run the land, and how they run the land is not satisfactory, and how they run the land needs to be examined, and we need to point out flaws in the systems that are in place. So, I wish people would not be offended by the term.
Who, in your opinion, is not listening or paying enough attention to your generation, and why do you believe this is so? Well, three parts to this. Why do you believe this is so, and why should they listen?
So the question is, in essence, who do I believe is not listening to my generation that should be listening?
Yeah,
All right, again,
and also, why
answer,
why do you believe they're not listening?
why do I believe they're not listening? All right, and I hate to do this, but who do I believe is not listening? I believe that people from the last generation are not listening. The adults among us. I am an adult myself. I should say the elders among us. So our parents are not listening. Our grandparents are not listening. And before I go on, I should point out that majority of them are not listening. There are exceptions, but they are just not listening to us. And why do I believe they're not listening to us? Because if they had been listening to us, Selwyn, they would understand that the way in which they bring us up psychologically conditions us to hate. I try to not use the word hate. Sometimes I wonder if using the word hate is too strong, but really it isn't. They try to hate each other. And when I say us, I mean Indians and Africans, my black brothers and sisters. That is how we're conditioned to fear each other. And had they been listening to my generation a long time ago, they would realize that, this is not what we want. This is not the sort of men and women we want to become. And we shouldn't have to fight you to become good men and women, to become the type of men and women that you should have been for us by now.
Um,
Ju-
Sorry, you were going to say something else?
No, I was going to ask you if I tackled both parts of your question aptly.
Yes, you have. You have. Racism. This is a statement on your blog. It stops with me. Being East Indian
Yes.
does not automatically make me PPP. For the sake
Mhm.
of clarity, can you tell us what you mean by that?
All right. When I wrote that, it was actually inspired by something that happened to me quite a few times. When I walk down the street and somebody, they have a drive to make it a PPP. They target me. I've been targeted, and they make these comments, and they're disgruntled at the current government, and they say things, and I look at them and I say, listen, why do you see me as a symbol of the PPP? Is it because I'm Indian? Is that why?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer to that is yes. That because I'm Indian, it follows that I am a symbol of the PPP, and the reason for this is because politics in Guyana has been built upon racism. The late Chetty Jagan became an icon for the PPP, and Chetty became the symbol of the Indian. Chetty represented the Indians, and likewise, the late LFS Burnham became the symbol of the black man, and he represented the blacks in the country. And because of these icons, because of how we continue to dishonor these men and how we see them, we're segregated still. And we still fear each other. And that right there is the political machinery at work, though. And that's politics in Guyana for you in a nutshell. That's how it works. And people try to deny it, but it's the truth. And my generation, we're seeing it. We've been watching and we've seen it. And while a lot of us aren't talking out, yes, we are rising. We're coming.
Do you think that cyberspace, social media, is helpful to your generation? And I'm saying this in the spirit of the Arab Spring and Occupy Wall Street, and of course Guyana has its own Occupy, I forget what it is, Occupy something. But you think social media is going to help this generation spread its message and develop a cohesive effort, or I should say cohesiveness, and help to transform this country? How do you think social media will help you?
Well, right now, yes, social media is definitely important to what we're doing right now. In fact, a lot of the debates, a lot of the important debates that are happening, debates that are going to have major repercussions for Guyana and what Guyana becomes in a couple of decades, they're happening in social media, on Facebook. Especially on Facebook, debates are happening daily. And the sad part about it is that only a certain type of Guyanese mind will be able to see that debate. So the issue becomes now, is, how do we move the debate from social media to the man and woman in the street who hasn't yet discovered social media? How do we take the message to them? At some point, the debate has to move from cyber world to the streets. And that's a bridge, I am going to have to cross very soon. The message has to get out there.
If I may go to the chat room for a brief moment. Karen G said, "Aye, Sarah, you are onto something with the fear. How many more are willing to step up and be heard?" And then Lester Jordan said, "Parents are all paralyzed by fear." Lester Jordan said again, "That's it in a nutshell. We all stick with our tribe." And then Karen G said, "Listening to you makes me think of stop and frisk by the NYPD here in New York, of Latinos and blacks and racial profiling. So from the legacy of these dead people, we are all racially profiled." Sarah,
Yeah.
let's take a quick break.
Said, "Suffer the little children to come unto me." Every day, more than 30,000 children around the world die of preventable diseases. More than 300,000 children are being used in war as child soldiers. Lord have mercy. A child should be loved. A child should be held. A child should be clean. A child shouldn't smell. A child shouldn't go to bed hungry at night. A child should be taught wrong from right. A child should learn to say thanks and please. A child shouldn't suffer from preventable disease. A child is
We are back with a very
Yeah.
lovely Sara Bharrat. Sara, where do you draw your inspiration?
My inspiration. Well, of late, the inspiration has been coming from the people around me. Sadly, the inspiration has been coming from pain and bitterness and fear.
Hmm.
But nevertheless, I'm inspired to write so that maybe I can get rid of those things. I believe it was Lester you said that made a comment. Our parents are paralyzed by fear. Uh, well, something I'd like to point out is that while I'm calling out the last generation, you know, I do not want anyone listening to mistake this as me beginning to play the blame game. This is not the blame game, you know. The last generation, they're very fond of playing the blame game. This is not about the blame game, but rather this is me calling you out on what you have done or not done, and me saying to you that, listen, there's still time, you're still alive, and you're still here with us. If you begin to think now, you can still help us. You know, all is not lost. They can still help us. So part of the aim in writing so honestly is my hope of snapping that chain of fear. How do I make them reactive? How do I break them out of out of being paralyzed? So that is one of the aims of writing as well.
Sara, how would you respond to someone who would question the authenticity of your commitment to your cause?
I didn't get that. I'm
How
having
would you
issues
respond
here.
to how would you respond to anyone who would question the authenticity of your commitment to your cause?
Uh, well, instinctively, I would like to batter them over the head with my sense of belief and to say, listen, I know you're accustomed to not seeing anything authentic, and I understand why you may think this is just another farce, but you need to believe. But no, I found that the best way to deal with people like that is to leave them, let them listen, let them witness, and let them see. And eventually, when they make the decision to believe in me and my authenticity, that decision will be a lasting decision. So we can't make people believe or we can't make people trust us, but what we can do is we can let our actions show them that that I am here for the long haul and that I will be here until the end.
I am going to read something from one of your writings. As for my elders who still cling to the ashes of Chetty and Bornham, for now I have given up trying to decide how or what I feel for you. I did not choke on rice flour, but I choked on something far worse in my time. I am sorry that you had to choke on rice flour, but I am even sorrier that you do not yet realize that I am choking in a far worse way than you did. The bottom line is, I think it's time someone told you that rice flour was not your black brother's fault, just like the current corruption in Utopia is not entirely our fault. And this is from the ashes of Chetty and Bornham. Can you remember what
Yes.
was going through your mind as you were writing this, and what inspired you to write it?
Uh, Particularly when I said that I've given up trying to decide what I feel about my elders, and of course I was directly speaking to my Indian elders. Because when I think of, it's natural for us to want to think of ourselves as victims. And before I snapped out of how I had been socialized within my own cultural community, I, I had felt as though I was a victim. And now when I think of it, I realize that I am not the victim, that my elders are the victims, and they have been the victims of, again, the political machinery that has been in operation. So when I think about them, Selwyn, I'm not sure if I should be angry with them for putting me in this position. I am not sure if I should pity them for having been victims. I am not sure how to feel about them some days. And I'm trying to be as honest as I can be with them because I believe the only way to bridge the void between them and us is by speaking, using words, building a bridge with words. Uh, as for as for pointing out to them that the rice flour was not their black brother's fault, it's again because of what happened with politics in Guyana, the racial politics. As I said earlier, Chetty became the icon for the Indian man, Burnham became the icon for the black man, and what happened is, regardless of what these politicians did, some good, some bad, whatever their actions were, be, their actions became associated with the Indian and the black, them and us. And these two communities are still at war. They're blaming each other for things that happened decades ago. And I wish they would see that life is too short to do that. I want them to wake up. And when I think about this too long, Selwyn, sometimes I get frustrated. I'm surprised I still have hair left on my head.
I understand. I'm going to go into the chat room for a bit. Karen G
Yeah.
said, Sarah, in New York, in the GT community, we are also profiled. Lester Jordan said, I think social media may have only a limited effect external to Guyana. At some point, the message has to get to the people. Mom and dad, when we eating duff and roti, and the bottom house sip and Sarah, authenticity will be questioned as soon as she stands, literally, on a political stage. Sarah, this brings me to this popular phrase, am I my brother's keeper? But I want to put a slight twist on it this way. Am I my neighbor's
Yeah.
keeper? I hope it is an appropriate question to ask you because it leads me into one of your articles titled, If you call my brother a slave, I shall answer you.
All right.
That
Let me tackle that first. Yes,
if you call
I am my neighbor's keeper.
right
I am my neighbor's keeper,
well
regardless of who my neighbor is.
who your neighbor is, okay. um I wanted to say that title chills me. That's not the right word. It pauses me. I like it. It resonates with me. Brilliant, right? I want to ask you what inspired this article, and what it means for us to be more understanding and sensitive to each other.
All right. This article came because I really wanted my friends, I wanted my black family, my black friends, my black countrymen and women to know that there's somebody on the other side who's fighting for you. I wanted them to know that while there were some Indians who insisted on being hateful and bitter and angry and who looked for the worst possible way in which to hurt them, I wanted them to know that there was somebody on the other side who would not sit silently and watch those set of Indians who insisted on being hurtful, watch them do it. There was somebody here who was not going to witness that wrongdoing and not object to it. So I am here on the other side objecting to that, and I'm here fighting for them. And when I said that I believe that my brother is going to be on the other side fighting for me, I am fighting for me. I am very certain of that, because there are those of us on either side of the camp who are awakened, and those of us who have been awakened, we have to start calling the others out. We have to say, hey, listen, what you're doing is wrong. I know it's wrong, and I'm not going to condone it. I will not let you get away with that. We make them responsible for their actions.
I'm glad you mentioned about your brother, because there's this piece I want to read, a piece that you concluded brilliantly. You said, and know this too, when you call my brother, our brother, a slave, then I shall answer you. Because when he answers for himself, you accuse him of being angry and bitter and buried in the past. Of what will you accuse me? Of not having defended the Indian against the equally hurtful coolie? There is no need for me to defend the Indian, to defend myself, because I am sure my brother shall answer for me like I answer for him. I was going to ask you, do you believe that? But you said that already. You believe that this is so. Your
Yes,
brother would answer for you. Um,
I do believe that.
does your environment frighten you, Sarah?
It used to frighten me.
Mm-hmm.
It used to. Uh, I used to be very afraid, but the fear came again from how I was socialized. You know, I was taught that we should be grateful for the good things that were being done by our government, that we should be grateful, and that to get up and to point out flaws and to say that I was not satisfied with this was being ungrateful. So while I was stuck in that cycle, I lived in fear. And the second I broke out of that cycle, I began to live. I began to experience my country and people, my world. That's when I started to live.
You asked in your piece, what moves a man or woman to hurt another in such a manner? Then you explained the deep-rooted fear within an Indian man to call his black brothers a slave. I think this applies to any society that has a history of slavery. What do you believe is the
Yeah.
root cause of this cruel and insensitive practice in Guyana, that is?
Well, the article explains it. The cause of it is this the political machinery. Now, because I am from a particular cultural community, the Indian community, I can only speak from my side
Mm-hmm.
of the experience. And what happens is this thing called grassroots politics, bottom house politics. That's where the conditioning happens. That's where they condition you to fear your black brother. That's where they say that any power other than Indian power means that Indians will never be empowered in this country. That is what they teach you. And what moves a man to hurt his brother in such a manner? It's his fear of his brother because psychologically he's programmed by this political machinery to be afraid of his brother's empowerment. So what does he do? He lashes out at his brother, and unfortunately, history has provided him with a very sharp weapon. So he calls up the word slave and he pelts it at his brother, and even he doesn't understand exactly what it is he's doing because he more than likely isn't acquainted with his history, probably not very educated, or at least I'd hope to think that he's not acquainted with his history or not very educated, because those are the excuses that I'm allowing for those persons who would have cast that nasty word slave at a black brother. So the bottom line is that fear always motivates the infliction of pain. Because I fear you, I will hurt you. So in that article, I tried to educate. I tried to explain that, I don't even understand why they insist on calling it the system of slavery. It's actually the system of enslavement. My black brother did not choose that fate.
Mm-hmm.
He was a victim, and I think it's time that people began to understand exactly what happened and to understand what sort of a psychological wound they're inflicting on somebody when they use the word. And quite frankly, I don't think many people grasp that here. They just don't.
Do you
And
have
they
do,
wouldn't.
do you ever get discouraged, Sarah?
Discouraged. No, I discouraged is not the word for it. Discouraged would not be the word for it because my grandmother picks a bone with me all the time. She says I'm the most stubborn person she's ever met in her life, and that's pretty funny because I think the same thing about her. And my policy is this: there's a reason I use that jumping off of the mountain image. It's because once you jump, there's no way you can't reverse the jumping. So for me, the motto is all or nothing. So if you're going to do it, you do it and you get it done. Once you're committed to the cause, There's no going back. There's none.
I'll go into the chat room. Karen asked, how did you become so sensitive to other races?
Um, I became sensitive to other races because uh, there's several reasons. I'm trying to sift through them to perhaps give the most important. I believe for me, I, all right, let me start here. Like everyone else who sits around in denial or at least refuses to acknowledge that there is a race problem here, you know, I used to do the same thing. I sat around not talking about it until one day, a few years ago, a friend of mine, very good friend of mine, worked with me at Starbucks News, told me a story. He said to me, he said, Sarah, when I found out that we were different, that I was black and you were not black, I found out that in nursery school because another child looked at me and said something to me and pointed out to me that we were different, and never before in my life had I realized that I was different from another human being. And in many ways, that story, it hit me where it hurt the most. It really knocked me because I kept picturing that friend as an innocent boy standing there thinking that his world is a beautiful place as it should be. And then all of a sudden, somebody takes a knife and just cuts open that beautiful image that he has and lets all the ugliness, all the hate and bitterness begin to seep into his world. And, they robbed him of something. I've never gotten over that story.
And
then,
sorry,
yeah.
The chat room, Avanand said, I just learned more about this girl whom I thought I knew so well. Do you still pray in Sanskrit? What do you think is or will be the single most effective thing that will change our political psyche?
All right. I should say publicly that one Avanan is my best friend. I'm pretty sure of it. And no, a lot of my friends are going to be surprised at this me they're seeing, because the honesty that I am practicing here now with you and anyone who has read my work, never before have I been dishonest with anyone, Selwyn, or even with myself. So for me, this process is both me admitting the truth to myself as well as sharing it with someone else in the hopes that they will learn like I've been learning. As for what do I think will change the political psyche, what will change it is first to acknowledge, for each of us to acknowledge that we have been wrong. We have been wrong. It comes with that acknowledgement. Before you even begin to fix a problem or you even begin to address the glitch in the psyche, you need to realize, we need self-realization. And sadly, that's not something that comes easily. But we've each got to look within ourselves. It starts on this individual level. Look within yourself and ask, have I been a part of the problem? Am I guilty of some of these things? Am I sorry about doing it? Will I stop doing it? And when we begin to examine our own actions and to take responsibility for those actions, that alters the manner in which we think, and ultimately, it's going to have a rippling effect throughout the nation. That I believe is what needs to happen.
Sarah, let's take a quick break, very quick.
Yes.
I am smart enough to not abuse time. There's so much to cover, and time seems to be creeping up on us. Sarah, in the chat room, Lester Jordan said, or asked rather, what has been the reaction from your 1 friends, 2 family, 3 enemies since you have spoken out?
All right. The reaction of my family, Lester. Well, I don't think even my family, they don't really realize what I'm doing just yet. I tried reading one of my blogs to my mother after hearing about the 3rd paragraph. I read the first blog to her about me being East Indian, not automatically making me PPP. After the 3rd paragraph, my mom went silent, and she says, "Is this going to get you in trouble?" And I smiled at her and I said, "Of course not, Mom." And that was the end of it. And that's one thing about my family. Regardless of whether or not they agree with my views on something, they have always let me shape my own beliefs. If it's one thing I'm grateful to them for, it's for having let me shape my own beliefs. As for my friends, again, I don't think many of my friends know what I'm about yet. A couple of them have been reading the blog and so on. Earlier today, one of my classmates from campus messaged me and asked me, "Oh, I see you're a social activist now." And I said, "Listen, I've always been a social activist. You just never noticed until now." And as for enemies, I don't have any enemies. I have no enemy at all. All I have are a bunch of brothers and sisters in this country who are lost. All of them, they're my brothers and sisters. They're lost. They need finding. I'm trying to help them to find their way again. We're not dealing with the word enemies. No, none at all.
Can you tell us one particular challenge you overcame recently that you're proud of?
I didn't get the last part of that.
One particular challenge that you are proud of, that you overcame recently, that you're proud of.
Well, yeah, that would be me breaking my silence. And for me, I think of this as me having graduated from being a coward. I'm no longer a coward because I sat down for years. I sat down for years not saying anything, and I wasn't silent because I had nothing to say, but I was silent largely because I didn't feel it was yet the time to say it. But again, that was an excuse. The real reason behind the silence was the fear. So having learned to embrace the fear, I believe for me that is going to be the best thing I've achieved in this life. Learning to embrace fear. Because when you embrace fear, it's amazing how you see the world. I can do anything now. Anything.
Do you believe there are others like Sarah? And I don't mean that you're not unique. I mean other voices, dormant as they may be, or silent.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah?
There are other voices, and that is one of the aims. I hope that by being dishonest, by coming out, so to speak, that I will inspire my peers to do the same thing. And I can tell already that some of them are sitting on the sidelines, waiting to see what the reaction to me will be, and ultimately how Guyana reacts to me is going to determine when these voices join mine, and hopefully they join soon.
The image that comes to mind as you say that is one where you have perhaps a field of embers. Each one of these voices are smoldering embers. Do you believe that they will one day come together and create a huge bonfire? And if that is the case, what will take them, or what will cause them to come together and make? I don't really particularly like the message that fire symbolizes, and I'm not using it as a metaphor for destruction.
Metaphor, yeah.
But I mean it perhaps as a metaphor for light. What do you think it will take for these various embers to come together and become one huge bonfire?
I think it's already happening. I think the sparks are already there. What we really needed were some voices. Already we've got a few voices that have been, we've got voices out there, voices we've been hearing. when I got up and I joined, there we had another voice. Hopefully, somebody else is going to come next week. Please, somebody, please come next week. We're going to have another voice next week. And one by one, we're going to have these sparks, and we are going to have a huge, huge fire. It's going to be, amazing. Um, what is going to make it happen is this. The more of us who stand up and speak, what we're actually doing, we're not only breaking the silence, but we're also showing our peers that, listen, I understand what you're feeling. I understand what's happening to you. I'm living here too. I feel the same things. I struggle with the same emotions. I struggle with everything you struggle with daily. And when they realize that we're all sitting in the same boat, on the same ship, in the same space, they're going to realize that, listen, I need to get up there and help to fight my fight, because it's not just their fight, it's my fight too. And I think that there is something that a lot of people don't realize. They don't realize that there are other people out there, there are other Guyanese who feel the exact same things that they're feeling as well.
In the chat room, Avenand said, just to cover all bases, it is said that if we forget our past, we are doomed to repeat it. Therefore, what would you say to the elder who uses this to justify his or her political choice?
I wish that came with some more clarity. Forgetting the past. Now, of course, without history, we have nothing. We have no identity, nothing. So, I don't think I've ever heard any politician say forget about the past.
Mm-hmm.
What I've heard them do is use the past and twist the past and manipulate our history to do damage. That is what they use the past to do. And in the same way, we have got to learn to capitalize on our history, on our past. So here we are today. We can use their mistakes to learn from them, yes, and to not repeat them, yes. But we also use their mistakes to show them what they've done wrong, and we use their mistakes to feed them some hope. Because I believe in redemption. I do believe in redemption.
Karen G said, it is quite refreshing to know that you exist and is willing to stand up. How many more are there like you? How can they begin to stand up? I'm always aware that change comes from centers. I guess we just covered that, right?
Mm-hmm.
In a way.
We did
well, let me finish off Karen's question. Comes from centers of youth and the mind. Should we expect more? I want more. Are you being bothered by others who disagree with you speaking out?
All right. Now, she's asking.
Let's take the last part, because I think we covered the first part just now. Are you being bothered by others who disagree with you speaking out?
I wouldn't say that I've been bothered by people who disagree with me speaking out, but rather I've been slightly bothered by people. I've been slightly bothered by people, actually I should rephrase that. There are those people who have been bothered by me because they don't fully understand the message that I'm trying to get out there. So, for example, I've since been dubbed the anti-Kuli woman.
Mm-hmm.
And they say things like, oh, you're worse than racist and you're a blood traitor. But that's to be expected because, again, that comes from the grassroots Indian mentality, that the Indian has to be only for the Indian. And when you step out of the cultural community, you're ultimately betraying that cultural community. So that's to be expected. What I can hope for those people is that, eventually they will hear the words or read the words, and they will eventually get the message.
I have several more questions for you. I mean, quite a few actually. I would like to invite you to go rapid fire. So I'll ask you. You answer as quickly as you can. These that I'm about to ask you. Why do you believe your writing is resonating with so many people?
I believe the writing is resonating with so many people simply because I reflect the things that they feel. So when they read an article, it's like they're looking into a mirror. That's exactly why.
Hmm. Um, what was the worst thing that ever happened to you?
The worst thing that ever happened to me, well, it would have to be abuse. Yeah, I had a rough patch in my life where I was in an abusive relationship for a number of years. That there's the worst thing that ever happened to
Hmm.
me.
And what is the most important lesson that you have learned in recent years?
The most important lesson would definitely be how to respect and see. And again, this goes back to respecting and seeing the people in front of me. The more I learn about you, the more I see you, the more I see you, the more I respect you, the more I respect you, the easier it is for us to work together and change.
Mm. And you know, listening to you
Uh,
and you speaking just now about working together, the sense I get about you, Sarah, is that you're very inclusive in gender and race. But I want to ask this question because it speaks specifically to young girls and young women. What would your message be to organizations supporting girls and young women?
Supporting,
Girls and young women.
again, the message is the same one. To
Hmm.
those organizations, I would say concentrate less on large programs
Hmm.
and try to encourage speaking more. Uh, in our society, and I'm sure this is true globally as well, things like violence, we don't speak about abuse. Certain topics are still, it's highly uncomfortable for us to speak of, and we need to start speaking. Again, it's breaking the silence. The more we talk, the easier it is to get the problem fixed. Words heal.
What is the least helpful advice someone has ever given you?
That was yesterday. Somebody said to me, "You should give up because nobody's listening."
And how did that motivate you?
Uh, it amused me actually, so when I started to laugh, I was like, one day you're going to realize how stupid that statement was, and when you do realize it, I will give you my hand and say to you, come help me.
Um, how, in your opinion, can any Guyanese survive the reign and the racist politics in Kane Utopia?
By waking up Selwyn and by opening their mouths. We Guyanese
Uh,
are loud people. I can stand at my front gate and scream all the way up the street, man, at somebody, and they hear me. And I believe if we use these voices we have, something is gonna happen. We can start a chain reaction, maybe forget about social media and scream from one house to the next if that's what it takes.
what is it about your writing that feeds your spirit?
What is it about my writing that?
Feeds your spirit.
For me, writing has always been a way of admitting truth to myself. I believe that one of the fundamental flaws of the human being is that we seem to be hardwired to lie to ourselves, which I said earlier. So, writing keeps me honest with myself and it keeps me honest with the world.
I
So for
must.
me,
Mhm.
writing is honesty and truth.
Honesty and truth. The chat room, Lester Jordan said, when speaking out, do you plan to broaden your message? Example, corruption. Bearing in mind, if you did, you would be viewed purely as just another political operative.
All right, now the beginning of this, it started out with me. It's self-examination.
Uh huh.
By examining my own experiences, I'm hoping that I can teach other Guyanese. Now, broadening the message, yes, it's a complex thing to do. How do I broaden the message without becoming politically branded? And, I should state that here and now that being politically branded is something that is not going to happen. That's one of the first things I stated on the blog. I am just me. I am just Sara Bharrat, a Guyanese. I'm nothing else, and nobody is going to brand me. Because when we allow politicians and political groups and organizations to brand us, what they do is they limit our freedom
Mm-hmm.
and they begin to create a stronghold in our minds. So that's not going to happen. Politicians must not have me in their pockets, and they must not have Guyanese or anybody in their pockets. And this goes to the world. Don't let politicians put you in their pockets.
Sarah, what do you do for fun?
Well, this might be funny. I read for fun,
Really?
but there's a catch to the reading. When I was growing up, we had this really old desk, and under the desk were like all sorts of books. So for recreation, what I did is I used to read anything. So I read from labels to textbooks to, pamphlets to anything. So reading is amusing. And then from time to time, I look at products and I look for grammatical errors on the label. So if that product has a grammatical error, it's not good for you. Because if they don't know their language, they don't know product making.
Are you hopeful that if we start with the youth, that racial harmony is possible in Guyana?
Yes, I am certain. I am certain. One of the indicators would be the rise in, well, what I assume to be a rise in interracial relationships. So yes, definitely.
Lester Jordan said, my opinion, the growing and systematic racism practiced since independence is the single greatest deterrent to progress in Guyana. And Ronald J. Daniel said, want to compliment you for standing up. Are you prepared to give up your life for the advancement of our people?
Well, yes, I am. In fact, that was one of the first things I had to decide before I broke the silence. What am I willing to give for the people around me? What am I willing to give for my peers, for the man that I sit next to in a lecture, for the woman who sits next to me in a minibus, for my neighbor who I grew up next to? What am I willing to give to these people? And yes, I am willing to give life for these people.
Sarah, if you could go back in time, what would you tell your 12-year-old self?
What would I tell my younger self?
Your 12-year-old self.
I would, oh, my 12-year-old self.
Yes.
I would tell my 12-year-old self, don't worry. You don't need to worry about the fact that you don't currently have a male role model in your life, but by the time you're 13, you're going to have 10. So, yes.
Do you have a particular practice to relieve stress?
I've got a number of practices, actually. One of the things I do a lot is I tend to get up between 4:30 and 5 most mornings. And I would sit on my back veranda and I look at the sunrise. So
Sarah.
For me, that humbles me. It tells me that there's something far greater than you here, that you're a speck in the universe. And it humbles me. And I believe that when we stay humble, we do great things.
Sarah, you and I have this dance since we've met only several days ago, where I ask you certain questions, and it seems as though I like to inflict torture on myself. I asked you the other day about what you were drinking. You said some cold cane juice, and you know what that did to me. And now I asked you what you do to release stress, and then you had to describe the veranda and the sunset. Thank you. Thanks so much for that. It is cold outside, and perhaps remnants of snow on the ground. Anyway, whose voice do you hear when you're about to make a significant decision?
I didn't get the first part of your question.
Whose voice do you hear, or whose voice do you listen to when you're about to make a significant decision?
I don't hear a single voice. It depends. When I'm about to make an important decision, I actually ask myself a question, and depending on how I answer that question, it determines whether or not I will act. And the question I always ask myself is, are you going to regret this? Yes.
Why is regret the barometer?
It has to be regret because I've looked at the people around me. I've listened to the elder Guyanese speak, and they all have so many regrets when they look back at their lives. They have things they're happy about, but it seems to me that almost always the regrets outweigh the things that they, are happy about. And I don't want that to ever be me at all.
Karen G in the chat room said, "I am looking forward to more from you. Keep keeping keep doing it." And Avenant said, "That's a very good question, Selwyn." Thanks, Avenant. And what is next for Sarah?
No idea. Let's see where the road takes us. But
I like your
the
honesty.
fight's a continuous thing.
Sorry?
I said the fight is a continuous thing.
Mm-hmm. How would you like to be
Yeah.
remembered, Sarah?
How would I like to be remembered? I don't think I've actually thought that one through, but maybe if you were put in a position where you had to remember me, Selwyn, I hope you would think of the cane juice and it would make you smile.
Yes, I know you've
I
added you've added another one, the sunset or the sunrise. Sorry, early in the
Yes.
morning on the veranda.
So,
Yeah. Hmm.
so I hope that when people remember me, they don't remember an image that is Sarah. They don't. I hope I never become an icon. I hope that they remember a human being, somebody they can relate to, somebody who, would have understood what they felt and what they were trying to do, and somebody who held their hand and helped them do it.
If it,
That's it. Just, a friend. I want them to remember a friend,
a
Selwyn.
friend. So
Because
if
I'm
you
trying very hard to be a friend.
so if you were writing your epitaph, what would you say?
Well, there are two words that popped into my head. I would say be happy.
Be happy.
Happy. People think that happiness is overrated, that there's no such thing as happy. And, I think that's ridiculous. There is happy. Happiness exists. Uh, and we spend too much time being miserable and not enough time being happy. So when I look at my sunrise in the morning, or I listen to some music and I just sit under a table. I like sitting on the table sometimes just to like hide from my family sometimes.
Hmm.
A childish habit that stuck with me. But you need to take 60 seconds or something in a day and just be you within yourself and be happy for 60 seconds. 60 seconds of happiness gives you strength to do things you never thought you could do.
I like that. Ronald J. Daniels, your humility will ensure that we overcome the seemingly insurmountable obstacles on our way forward. We will give our country back to the people. Keep standing up, Sarah. Very brave.
Yeah, this is R.J. Daniels.
Yes.
Well, Mr. Daniels, I do believe Mr. Daniels is one of those voices who has joined mine. So to Mr. Daniels, I say, welcome, my brother, and I hope you stay with me.
And Lester Jordan said, has any of the local media or political platforms invited you to speak on these issues?
No, nobody has yet invited me to speak on these issues. I believe that I am being largely ignored right now, but it doesn't matter. But even if the thing with speaking on political platforms or for political organizations is that when you begin to associate yourself with them, the branding process starts.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe what I should do is I should probably go out there and hold some town hall meetings, like Rodney and Cipriani and all the great ones that we had in the past. The Caribbean region has had many great leaders. Maybe I should take a leaf out of their books and start preaching the word in the market square. I think that would have an impact, don't you, Selwyn?
Yes, I totally agree. Do you believe that your fight for social change and social justice will ever be done?
No, it's not. It's not even that do us part thing for me.
Mm-hmm.
Because even after I die, hopefully my words are still going to be here and they're going to continue working. So I think this is a task that we take with us beyond death. Whatever's beyond death, we take this task with us. Great men like Mandela and Gandhi have taken the task with them beyond death. We laid Mandela to rest, but is he really resting? No, he's not resting at all. I hope he never rests.
Sarah, my next two questions seem almost unfair to ask you because you're so young, but as Lester Jordan said, you're wise beyond your years, and you seem to have such an old soul that I will take that risk. One first question is, what was the best day of your life?
Best day of my life. The best day of my life was at my, it happened, not day, but the best moment
Mm-hmm.
in my life to date has been a moment of clarity I had at my Nana's cremation. I was standing there at the crematorium at Rhymesec, West Coast Demerara, and I was thinking about death. And I realized that I didn't fear dying, or I didn't fear death in itself, but what I actually feared was how people died. How would they feel? I was concerned about the pain they would feel, and I was concerned about the fact that they would have to die alone. Like my nanny, my maternal grandmother, has not been well for years, and I used to live in fear that she would die. And I realized that I wasn't afraid of her dying. I was afraid of her dying alone.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing. I think that's the one of my deepest fears. It's of leaving people to suffer alone. We should not be alone. And I try not to let that happen. So that there was the best moment of my life to realize that, this great bad thing, death, no, I don't fear you anymore.
Hmm.
I reasoned that one out, Selwyn.
What are you most proud of?
I'm sorry?
What are you most proud of?
I'm not hearing that.
Okay, sorry. Is this better? What are you most proud of?
What am I most proud of?
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'll tell you what I'm most proud of, and this happened this morning. Somebody I went to high school with, and in high school, this person never struck me as being, very conscious on any level. They were just going through emotion. And they wrote to me this morning, and they said, Sarah, I read one of your blogs, and it's interesting. And I said, why do you find it interesting? And he said to me, because it's true, and I feel the same things, and now you have me thinking. And that is what I'm most proud of, Selwyn, that I've been able to make at least one of my peers think. So even if it's one person thinking, that's an achievement.
If you could choose, what would you be doing 5 years from now?
What? Well, I would be doing the same thing that I'm doing now, hopefully on a larger scale with more impact, but I would tweak that. In 5 years, Selwyn, hopefully I would be in the same room with this famous young man that I love, just in the same room with the young man. That's where I'd be in 5 years from now.
Wow. Karen G said, oh, wow, so Mr. Daniels is standing up too. I am feeling even better that the numbers are increasing. I want to read something for you, Sarah. The grassroots politics does not encourage education for us Indians, something you wrote. At least, not the sort of education that enlightens the mind and makes it an independent entity. If it did, no doubt the sort of Indian who calls his brother a slave would understand the magnitude of what he has done. How would you describe the grassroots politics and its effects on the Guyanese society?
All right. Now, grassroots politics, largely, this is what happens within the Indian community. Now, that there is built upon a foundation of not only tradition, not only Indian tradition, but also Indian religion, and the main Indian religion would be Hinduism, right? Mm-hmm. One of the underlying concepts of this is that you're never for self, but you're for community. So what grassroots politics has done is it's manipulated this concept of not being for self, but for the collective, and it's applied it to itself, and that's how Chetty became an icon, and that's why they call me a blood traitor. As for the effects it's had on the country, I believe I'm evidence of that effect, that I am now here trying to build a bridge between two sides, and these are two sides that exist who are not even acknowledging that they exist. So I've got to deal with their denial and then build a bridge for them.
Sarah, is there anything else you would like to add?
Yes. I would like to tell Mr. Daniels that I'm not sorry for calling him out and that I believe he's going to stand with me. And I would also like to say this to any person listening, not necessarily someone from my generation, but someone from the generation that was then. Someone, those who are still alive, who have some responsibility for what's happening to me and my generation now. I'd like to say to them to please, please stand up, lend your voices, help us, and know that we forgive you for not thinking about us for even 30 seconds a couple decades ago. But you're still able to, and you can think about us now. So please think about us and help us. That's what I tell everybody, Selwyn. I tell them, come help me. And that's what I'm going to say tonight to everybody. Come help me.
Sarah, this is a question I asked every guest, and so you're not going to escape this.
Okay.
What makes you laugh out loud?
All sorts of things. It's it's a spontaneous thing. I laugh at you in cane juice. I laugh at my mother bobbing up and down her stairs. My mom is so full of energy, and she's got this pixie haircut. So when she's running up and down the stairs, her hair is all bouncy. Man, I crack up over that. And then there's also the boyfriend. He's a very disgruntled soul sometimes. So when he's groaning about something, yeah, it might be something serious, but I just find the general attitude hilarious. So I can laugh and laugh and laugh at that. Or sometimes I open the newspaper and I read some random comment there by some politician who perhaps still has some shred of goodness in his soul, and I just have to crack up over it because what am I going to do, Selwyn? If I don't laugh sometimes, I'm just going to sit here and cry and waste my bodily fluids and not do anything for my country.
And we don't want you to do that.
No, we don't want to.
Karen G asked, how can we help you at this point?
At this point, we're just starting, and at this point, what we're doing is speaking. So, to you, I say this: speak. Even if you speak to one person, speak. Let's get the chain going. For every one person that you awaken, they're going to be able to awaken somebody else, and that's how we do it. We cannot do it. We can't hope to do this thing in large numbers, but it needs a personal touch. So you do it one at a time. People need to feel that we care and we understand. So awaken them one at a time, and we'll get somewhere. That old adage: slowly but surely.
Ronald J. Daniel said, I wouldn't say that you have called me out, my dear. Smiles. I have been here preparing for my destiny, our destiny. You and I were born in the nick of time to lead our people through political service.
Yes, I agree with that. And I was provoking Mr. Daniels.
Well, what a provocation that was. But
you see what I mean, Selwyn? Look at that response. Look at that response. Look at the clarity of his voice.
Yes.
Look at the strength resounding there. You can definitely tell that Daniels is one to look at.
Sarah, time has cheated us once again.
Yes.
But thank you. And I hope that the objective I started out with, and that is one of the objectives, is so that each of us has our own interpretation of you, but a more multi-dimensional perspective of who Sara Bharrat is. And I won't like to say who I think Sara Bharrat is. I think Sara Bharrat is becoming. I think the metamorphosis is still happening, and our country is fortunate to have you. I think all of us are fortunate to have you. I think you are that spark that is going to ignite many other lights. And you are that gust of wind, that fresh gust of wind that's going to blow these smoldering embers into flames. I always think of the abundance of intellectual and academic capital that we have. But the analogy I use is like a building ablaze next to a huge expanse of water, perhaps a river. And the irony is that this the fire is fast consuming this building and there's water next to it. But if someone, or if there was a hose or a pipe that can channel that water, then perhaps they can out the fire. And I think that is what one of the things that our society needs. It's the harnessing and channeling of these various, I would say, gifts that we have. I applaud you for what you're doing. I think you're very courageous. I think you're very strong. I like your humility. I am touched by it. I believe, and I like your sense of humor. I think that is important in that environment in which you live. But most importantly, the courage and the fact that you embraced your fear. You said fear fuels your courage. So, again, Sara, thank you for indulging us this evening. Let's ask the question if you've ever been invited to speak. I don't know if CWS is the first time you've spoken on a forum like this, but if it is, we are happy for that. I'm sure that you have moved many of us. Thank you again.
Yes. This is the first time I've spoken on something the likes of this.
Wow. Let me just read a few more comments that are coming in before we close. Lester Jordan said, "Thank you, great interview, a luta continua." And Sara, again, we are an hour behind you, so a very special thank you. And Karen G said, "Come back again." Yes, and I have to say this before I close.
Calvin will have me again sometime.
I will, of course. You're now one of the women of CWS, of course. Ronald J. Daniel says, "Yes, Lester, the struggle continues." Samora, Michelle. I have to say thank you to Karen, because Karen is the one who started all of this. She inboxed me and she said, "You have to read this." And I'm like, why is Karen bothering me? I'm preparing for my shows. But I was obedient and I read it and I was like, oh my God, when can I get Sara on? And, I said this all in the beginning. An opening came up and here you are with your lovely smile. And thank you. Thank you.
Do I have time to pick a bone with you, Selwyn?
A bone?
A very short bone too, yes. You said to me that, that you all are lucky to have me, and I disagree with that. I am lucky to have you all because it's because of the people around me that I am who I am and that I will be who I become. So, no, the luck is not. I am the lucky one. The luck is all mine, Selwyn.
You know what, Sara? If I were a warrior going into battle and your humility was the only sword I have, I would go into battle very happy knowing that that sword will defend me to the fullest. Thank you for being so humble, Sara. You're a beautiful person. Thank you.
Thank you, Selwyn.
Good night.
Good night.
Mama, all GT massive.